Good morning, Year 4 and Year 5. I will be taking our class assemblies for today. So let me just load up this PowerPoint. We are going to be celebrating and learning a little bit more about Martin Luther King Day, which was actually on Monday. Just take a minute or two to think about who this inspirational figure was. We did have Black History Month towards the end of autumn term, and I know at least in Year 4 we looked at a video of the famous speech that he made. So is there anything else that you can think of as to what he did, why he was famous, why he was inspirational to so many people years ago and still to this very day, why we celebrate Martin Luther King Day? Keep that in mind as we work our way through the PowerPoint here. So our aim is to understand who Martin Luther King was and why he is remembered through the celebration of a national holiday in America. So Martin Luther King Day, or Martin Luther King Jr., really. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is an American national holiday marking the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King was born on January 15th, 1929, and the holiday is therefore held in January each year. So who was Martin Luther King? Again, it keeps saying Martin Luther King, but we do know him as Martin Luther King Jr. So Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta in the USA. As a child, he enjoyed doing all the sorts of things that you enjoy doing. He enjoyed playing sports, he learned to play the piano even, and enjoyed going to school. But life was sometimes difficult for Martin Luther King, simply because he was African American. America in the 1950s and 1960s was particularly unfair for African Americans. They weren't allowed to use the same facilities as the white people. They may have had separate toilets or certain areas for African American people and white people on public transport, like buses and trains. Makes me think back to Rosa Parks. I know a lot of you focused on that during Black History Month in autumn term. So African Americans had to use separate areas of parks and restaurants and even separate toilets to those used by white people. In some states in the USA, African American children weren't even allowed to go to school. Or if they were allowed to do that, they would have to go to separate schools, which weren't given a lot of money and didn't have many resources. Is this fair? Hopefully at the moment you're all sort of crying out in your head saying, no, absolutely not. So why is Martin Luther King Jr. being focused on here? I'm going to move past that one here. He is famous because he wanted to make sure that all Americans had the same rights, regardless of their race, of their skin color, of their religion. He became a civil rights activist, which means that he campaigned for improved rights for people to try to make all people equal, all people heard, all of their opinions and values listened to and respected. The 1955 bus boycott, and this is what I mentioned briefly earlier. In 1955, Rosa Parks, an African American woman, was traveling on a bus when a white man got on. In the 1950s, African Americans would have to give up their seats to white people. We sometimes see this now on public transport, people giving up their seats, typically for elderly people or for pregnant women, but that is out of respect. That is because we want them to be rested, whereas this was purely based on the colour of her skin. Because a white man entered the bus, she was supposed to give up her seat so that he could sit down. And she refused to do this and was subsequently arrested by the police. Martin Luther King asked African Americans to protest peacefully by not traveling on the buses in the city where Rosa had been traveling. They boycotted, which means did not use, the buses for 385 days, that's more than a year, which is incredible. The boycott ended when a court ruled that the segregation of people, so it means separating areas for people with different skin, would be stopped. So it's an amazing, impactful, peaceful, non-violent protest. And then that leads us on to the I Have a Dream speech. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. led a huge march on Washington, D.C., the US Capitol. Here, in front of a huge crowd, Martin Luther King made his famous I Have a Dream speech. Here is a short extract. I have a dream that one day little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as brothers and sisters. That idea of family joining together. It does not matter what the colour of your skin is, what your race, your religion is. Everyone is one family. We are equal. We are together. You can find that speech on YouTube anywhere if you want to look at that in a bit more detail. Let's have a look at some of his amazing achievements. In 1964, Martin Luther King Jr. received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work to end racial prejudice in the United States. The law was changed so that everyone could vote. It is because of Martin Luther King Jr. and others like him, like Rosa Parks, that people in the United States have equal rights today. Although, as we know, there is still a long way to go. Right now, there's still the Black Lives Matter campaign. You'll see if you're watching the football on the television that people are still taking a knee, taking a peaceful approach to try and continue that fight for racial equality. And this is a final picture here of Martin Luther King Jr. At one of his speeches. I hope you found that very interesting, a truly inspirational figure. If you'd like to do any more research, feel free to do that. Both myself and Mr. Venton would be interested to see what you find out. Bye-bye, year 4 and year 5.